Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Akshay. How are you, Akshay?
Fine, sir.
Mm,
How are you, sir?
Not very fine today, Akshay.
Why, sir?
Don't know, not feeling very well. Can't exactly place the reason and say this is what is happening, and therefore I'm not feeling. But somehow, in English they say, no, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. So it's that kind of non-specific thing. It's the usual pain. And yesterday I had to work very hard. So whole day I was sitting with those wonderful people. While we are waiting for others to come,
Sir,
you give me your considered opinion on what we should do in the evening. See, yesterday I spoke to you about communitarianism being the forebearer of multiculturalism. Um, so, should I carry on with multiculturalism, or should I go to Jeremy Waldron and his critique of communitarianism? Because he has a very strong and trenchant critique of communitarianism, despite the fact that he's actually not a political thinker. He's more of he's like Ronald Dworkin again. Uh, he's somebody who's more into jurisprudence, but he does have political ideas. And he raises a set of questions, almost a dozen questions, about communitarianism. And if you remember, when I was talking to you yesterday about uh, Michael Sandel, I had spoken to you about Michael Sandel not specifically spelling out what exactly he means by community, and how does he actually critique roles on the basis of that notion of community, which is an undefined notion. You remember I made that particular point,
yes, sir.
and that's why I said he's a dwarf riding on the shoulders of a giant. Actually, in a way, Waldron subscribes to the same kind of idea that I subscribe to. That is not to say that I'm as great as him. Waldron is truly great in many ways. I'm just a teacher in Osmania University. I'm no Jeremy Waldron.
No one are great, sir. To me, ideas are great. People are
Hmm.
not great.
Now, people who have great ideas are great people. Um, but I do agree that ideas are the ones that are great. But people who get good ideas, and those are the great people. So people can be great, but it need not be a competition about who's great and who's not. Once when I had attended a jazz music concert here in Hyderabad, it was uh, it was called an All Stars Jazz Ensemble, meaning all the musicians were stars in their own right, and the bass guitarist um, was a Frenchman by the name of Bunny Brunel. And Bunny Brunel, I got to chat with him because nobody knows jazz musicians, okay, in India, especially Hyderabad. So they are accessible. You could just go and sit and chat with them. And usually they are open to chatting. So I was chatting with him, and I asked him his opinion on another bass player um, whose name is Jacob Pastorius. And he said, look, the way you're asking me this question is as if there is some kind of a competition between who's great and who is not. He said, this is music is not football. I said, listen, before you proceed further, I didn't mean it in that way. I just wanted to know your opinion of Jacob Pastorius because I greatly admire his work. And he said, well, in that case, I will tell you a story. Jacob Pastorius didn't turn up in time for a show in which he was supposed to play. So Brunel was there, so they asked him to play, it seems. And then Pastorius came late and he sat and glared at Bunny Brunel. And Brunel asked him, what is your problem? And this guy said, my problem is you are standing where I am supposed to be standing. So, and playing, of course. So he said, okay, I'll get off from here. You take this place and play. And he said, I told him, why are you being so competitive? Because this is not football. We don't have to score goals against each other. This is music. This is music. It's a whole big ocean, and there is room for many people here. You didn't come, so I was playing. Now that you're here, you play. So I think that's a very appropriate kind of an example, even for the world of ideas. Um, Even for the world of ideas, yes, the world is big enough for a number of ideas, provided they do not have a concealed intention, which is different from the articulated intention, which is what I suspect Michael Sandel of doing. The communitarianism that he talks about is basically a concealed idea to promote the Republican caucus's idea of church going communities. And that is why I say a few things about Michael Sandel, like him riding on the shoulders of a giant like John Rawls.
Sir, I have a doubt, sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, Stan Swami was dead. He was said that he was denied slipper and straw. What is meant by slipper and straw?
Sorry?
Stan Swami was dead, isn't?
Yes, okay.
He
Huh?
was denied slipper and straw. What is meant by slipper and straw?
Slipper and
Straw.
STRAW.
Yes, sir.
No, slippers are those that you wear.
Sir,
Uh,
it's not slipper, it's sipper, SIPPR, for
Sipper,
drinking water.
sipper, sir.
sip,
Sipper, sorry.
sipper. Sipper is, see, he was not able to feed himself, apparently, as per his uh, as per his physician, who was looking after him in jail. So you get these glasses like this with a dome-like top, and they have a small aperture uh, on the top. So what you do is you beat up the food into liquid form in a mixer grinder, liquefy it, and you give it to people and make them sip from that. And a straw is what you are given to drink a liquid. So apparently, those were so he was on a liquid diet because he couldn't eat, he wasn't keeping well. Um, and the jail authorities have denied him those facilities. Father Stanislaus Swami. I don't know how he got involved in that Bhima Koregaon case. It's I've forgotten. It's been so long. I have to look at that right now. Well, COVID cases going up again in India, says the latest headline. Just before this, it said Dilip Kumar has died this morning. Uh, so, Akshay, so should we do Waldron today?
Yes, sir.
Because he mainly critiques communitarians. He does critique multiculturalists as well. He critiques Will Kimlicka. Um, but his main criticism is against these four people: Charles Taylor, Michael Walzer, uh, Michael Sandel, and Alasdair McIntyre. Um, he criticizes these four people. So since we stopped yesterday at communitarianism, I was wondering if it would be a good idea to finish off, because that is where he talks about hybridity. Uh, and you may be surprised to know that uh, he uses an idea of cosmopolitanism. Um, good friend Waldron, and this cosmopolitanism he actually derives from, of all people, Salman Rushdie. He derives it out of Salman Rushdie's life, and he's written a very interesting article in which he praises Salman Rushdie, and he also quotes Salman Rushdie. So I thought maybe it would be good to finish off Waldron today, if we can. So you think we should do that?
Yes, sir.
Madam Padma?
Yes, sir. I thought if we had begun Hobbes right yesterday.
No, not now. I was having a chat about the evening class, not today, not now.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
I was thinking why
No,
we
no,
do it
no.
now.
No. I was
Okay.
waiting for people to come while some were coming, some were leaving. So, yeah, I think I should briefly go on to the, before I go to the social contractualists and before I go on to Hobbes, I should briefly get back to this idea of what constitutes modernity. No, I think I should do it full. So I've done this with you while we were doing uh, what was classical liberalism in the context of in the context of libertarianism, but I'll once again, just to put things in some kind of perspective and to put them in order. Like I told you, I have this disorder about putting things in order. So what were the main components or ingredients of modernity when it was just coming into being? Let's be very careful about this, because with the passage of time, um, what was modern, also the definition of what was modern also expanded quite uh, 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 quite a bit, and it became a much more uh, vast idea than what it would be when I'm talking about it now. Uh, so when it was just about coming into being, it had these four elements. The first of which was free thinking. The second being freedom of speech. I yet again implore you, please do not use it as free speech. That is not a correct usage, both sensically and syntactically. Since I've already established that, I hope you remember, I'm not going to go deeper into it. And three is free will. And the combination of all these make um, uh, so I know some of you will remember this, perhaps some of you won't. Um, those of you who remember this will remember this as in the pre-modern times, uh, everybody considered society to be prior to an individual, in the sense that if there isn't a society, then there isn't an individual. Okay? The fact that individuals exist is a pointer to the fact that a society exists, which means that the existence of an individual is premised very much within society. So you can even say if there is no society, there is no individual. And that is why there was a talk of common good. And the talk of common good is something which you find in the thinkers of antiquity, especially Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle, who said what is good for society is good for the individual, right? Um, so this is where I give you an example. Can you have soldiers if you don't have an army? Okay, you don't have soldiers if you don't have an army. Can you have employees if you don't have a company? So now that I've been involved with this new uh, school and university that is coming up, one of the points I've been driving is that if you want your school to be really good, if you want people to opt for your school and do their postgraduate course there in your university, I'm not talking about the whole university because I'm a consultant free of cost. That is, they didn't ask me how much do you charge. I didn't tell them. Somebody told me yesterday that the work that I was doing, nobody charges less than 2 lakhs. I said, I've never seen such big amounts in my life, so let's forget it. Anyway, so I keep telling them that you need to have, please don't compromise on faculty. They wanted to show me how beautiful their buildings are, and I said, you're not building a 5-star hotel, building you're not building uh, some kind of a resort. So buildings don't matter. They really don't. And when I went to Nizam College as a student, well, it was an ancient, obviously it was almost 100 years old, and the buildings were rickety, and yet at that time it was the best college in Hyderabad. Without doubt, it was the best college in Hyderabad. And nobody looked at the buildings and said, we won't go to Nizam College. Nobody said that. People went to Nizam College because it was a great institution. And what makes a great institution is the people. And so I've been trying to hammer this point into these people, and I'm sorry to say, in vain. I have given them some contacts of some very good retired teachers who will want to take up some work because they don't want to sit at home, and these people are offering them salaries like 40,000, 50,000, and obviously they're being asked to get lost. So, but what you need to understand is The hunt for the faculty is on because there is a university, because there is a school in that university. I don't want to disclose names. It shouldn't be done on a forum like this. Uh, so since they are setting up all these things, they are competing with another rival school, and they say they have such, oh, their media center is so beautiful. I said, what do you want a media center for? Are you going to call people from the media and teach them the courses, or what is it that you're talking about? What is it that you're talking about? I was supposed to be a consultant. Even for that, I refused to accept it because it was so commercial, and I don't believe that education should be commercial. Uh, if you study that, that is also coming up shortly. And if you do a course there for 2 years, it'll cost you something like 34 lakhs. I don't believe that any sensible human being should be doing a course in social sciences and paying 34 lakhs for it. So I told them, your investment is not buildings, your investment should be people. So coming back to the idea of the army, only when you have an army do you recruit soldiers. Only when you have an institution of education will you talk about recruiting first a set of teachers, and then of course you also have to recruit students, right? So the education, the idea of the educational institution, I'm sorry, that comes first. Then come the faculty, and then come the students, right? That is the way things were until the modern period. Nobody imagined there could be anything else. So somebody like Akshay once asked me a particular question, and the question um, that he asked me was, you know, so before individualism came, you're saying there was socialism. I said, no, no. Before individualism came, there was no socialism. Socialism is a response to individualism. What existed before individualism was just this idea that the collective, which is the society, is prior to logically prior to the individual. And there was no such thing as individualism. Okay, only when individualism came did people start talking about socialism after seeing the failures of individualism. So please, if you have such doubts, just look at it this way. There was no bad till individualism came, and therefore there was no good. There was no good. Okay, you'll have a good only as an oppositional category to bad. Always remember, if you're positing a binary, which is good, bad, individualism, socialism, if you're doing a binary like this, the negative comes first. Bad comes first, and therefore good comes. Otherwise, there's no necessity for good. If everything is good, then there's no need to talk about it. And people don't have a word for it. They won't have a word for it. Similarly, if there is no individualism, why will people talk about socialism? They won't. And when I told you that Karl Popper makes a cardinal mistake, a very, very fundamental mistake of dubbing Plato an enemy of open society and calling him a totalitarian thinker. What exactly is he doing? He's creating an anachronism. An anachronism is breaking the time principle, the time sequence, chronology. I told you, chronos is the Greek uh, principle of time, and chronology is when you do things as in a time sequence. So to say Plato is an enemy of an open society, when did an open society come into being? There is no open society even here. We are talking about free thinking, we are talking about freedom of speech, we are talking about a free market, we are talking about free will, but where are we talking about an open society? So even in the early stages of modern society, there was no such thing as an open society. An open society is something that comes in the Lockean period and in the post-Lockean period. An open society. Okay. These are all ingredients that point towards the emergence of an open society. But the open society has not yet happened. Has not yet happened. And you will see that while we're doing Hobbes, who's very much a modern thinker, but not somebody who understands the idea of open society. So how can you possibly accuse Plato of being an enemy of open society? Second, you're calling him a totalitarian thinker. Is totalitarianism a form of thought? Everything that you have as an ism is not necessarily a form of thought. Some are just things or just occurrences. Totalitarianism is an occurrence of the 20th century. And you have to specifically blame Hitler for that. Hitler and Nazism and Mussolini and fascism. So fascism was a form of thought, but it wasn't totalitarian. The execution of fascism became totalitarian. Nazism is again not totalitarianism at the level of thought. It is national socialism. National socialism is what Nazism is. So it's positive. But in its execution, it becomes a negative thing. So once they, in the name of fascism and in the name of Nazism, you had the promotion of totalitarian regimes, then the positive meanings associated with fascism. Fascism is nothing but a collective. A fasce, F-A-C-H-E, in Italian is putting a bundle. If you have sticks, twigs, call them whatever you want, you make a bundle of them and tie them together so they are strong. So there's nothing wrong with that. So Benito Mussolini saying that the consolidation of the Italian identity was necessary was in itself not a bad idea. Was in itself not a bad idea at all. But, and that is the reason why he also found support from Antonio Gramsci. But when you get into the execution of it, it turns into dictatorship of a totalitarian kind. And when it turns into a dictatorship of a totalitarian kind, then the word loses all its meaning. It loses its meaning. Fascism is dictatorship, ruthlessness, killing. That's what it is today. Nobody will trace its origins back to the idea of a fasce and why a fasce was mooted in the first place. So it is devoid of that content now. It's just a word that symbolizes a deviant, perverted way of looking at society and doing things in society. That is what we find with fascism. So fascism is a shell. The content from that has been sucked out, not by someone else, but by Benito Mussolini and co. They sucked it out. And what it appeared to people, especially those who did not know Italian, was that it is something which is dictatorial, does not respect rights of human beings. It's merciless, ruthless, doesn't listen to any form of opposition. So all these things come together and replace the original content. So the original content is replaced by this. Same thing with Nazism. Very few people know that Nazi is German shortening of National Socialism. Okay? Very few people even know that. People don't even want to investigate the etymology of Nazi. Why? Because that too has been emptied of its original content. And what we have in the place of the original content, which was German national, is German, socialism in Germany. So you see, that also has been uh, evacuated of its original meanings, and it now represents things worse than fascism. It experimented on people, chose a specific set of people, the Jews. It chose the Jews, put them in gas chambers. If you look at Joseph Mengele and his experiments, he was called the Butcher of Lyon. If you look at Mengele's experiments, they are horrible. They are really horrible. So that is why it's a Holocaust. That's why it's called the Holocaust. So Nazism is worse than fascism. And for decades, America was struggling with how to combat the growth of communism. Funnily enough, in both the world wars, America, in the First World War, Russia, in the Second World War, the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they fought on the same side. But there was an ideological divide because America believes in free market and capitalism, whereas Lenin drew his inspiration from Marx, who was against capitalism in its advanced stage. Now you have to be very careful about this. I've said this before. If you read Marx when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, if you read that particular work, at least the copy of which I have, on pages 48 to 52, he extols capitalism, the virtues of capitalism, how it liberated all these things that you see, these four things that you see. Marx also celebrates. He celebrates the industrial revolution that came with capitalism. He celebrates that. And it's only later that he says that as capitalism is maturing, then the problems in the society start coming up. Always remember one thing, when something starts, there are no problems. When the World Wide Web, which is usually confused with the internet, does anybody know the difference between the World Wide Web and the internet? Anyone? Really? Nobody knows the difference between the World Wide Web and the internet. Okay. But I hope somebody is here. The silence is not because nobody is listening to me. Or is it that?
We are there, sir.
Okay. See, the internet has existed for a long time. It has existed for a pretty long time. The internet, in its original form, is a bit like the Internet of Things that people are talking about these days. Are you aware of that? Internet of Things?
Yes, sir.
Hmm?
Yes, sir.
You are. Okay. So just replace things with computers. All right. Now, what that demanded is the internet was used essentially by the military of different countries for the transmission of information from one computer to another computer. You must understand that much before web-based uh, email came into being, there was internet-based email. The only problem with that was since it was specifically a connection of computers. If I had an internet email ID, then I could access it only from my computer. I couldn't access it from any other computer, not even in my own city, not even in my own house. So each internet ID would be given for each computer, email ID. So you could email from one computer to another computer. So it was a network of computers. And it existed for quite a long time. It existed right from the 60s. Email also existed in Western countries from 69 onwards, I think. This internet-based email. So if you look at the World Wide Web, it's a protocol that enables you to access what belongs to you from any computer anywhere in the world. This was first used by Tim Berners, Berners, Berners-Lee in the CERN, which is the research center in Switzerland that is working on the Large Hadron particle collider to try and understand how the universe came into being. Was it matter and antimatter coming together that led to the blast, which is the Big Bang, and is that how the universe came into being? And I don't know if you're aware of this. You should read, please read this book by Dan Brown called Angels and Demons. In that he talks about CERN, CERN. I was actually very shocked when I read that book. I was really very shocked because I first read the Da Vinci Code and he put this thing there saying that we are, whatever research I have done here is actual research and things are as I am presenting them. I am no curator of museums, neither have I been to those museums, neither have I been to some of those countries that he talks about. So I just took it at face value. Okay, he's right. Maybe he's researched. But when I read Angels and Demons, which is actually his first work, the Da Vinci Code is his second work. That became more celebrated. And when the Da Vinci Code became celebrated, they re-released Angels and Demons, which didn't sell all that well when it was first released. But the second time around, people lapped it up. I was one of the people who lapped it up. And I was stunned at the accuracy of Dan Brown's research about CERN. I mean, I look at the title Angels and Demons. I never thought that he was going to sit there and talk about CERN, give you a very, very accurate descriptions of how the tunnels are dug under the CERN, how many, miles they are, kilometers, I'm sorry, they are in length, and how they go through different countries, I mean, different regions of different countries. He gives you a fantastic, fantastically correct description of CERN, of the Large Hadron Particle Collider. He gives you information about the Higgs boson particles. That's what people are trying to search for. I hope you know that boson is Satyendranath Bose, who sent a paper to uh, Einstein, who didn't agree with him but thought that he'll present that paper uh, in a seminar. By that time, this was in 1920s. Satyendranath Bose had passed away, and people said, this doesn't work. So you have to give it to uh, Einstein, the integrity that he had as a scientist, that he didn't agree with Satyendranath Bose, but he still decided it is his duty to put that paper in front of all the people who were having a seminar. It was in 1960s that another scientist called Peter Higgs, who picked up this paper of Satyendranath Bose, and instead of dismissing it, he said there is something solid in this. There is some solid substance to this paper. It is worth investigating. And so the search for the particle, it's called the God particle, which is because that is a tribute to Aristotle, the cause of all causes, the pure cause. So it is that thing of, it's called the God particle because it is that particle which is supposed to have led to the emergence of the universe in its present form. And he describes all this in perfect detail. my respect for Dan Brown went up by at least 1,000 steps after I read that book, because this is something that I knew. This is information that I already had, and seeing it being described so accurately in a novel called Angels and Demons was really, really an amazing thing. It was like somebody punched me in my solar plexus. It had that kind of effect. Another book that had that kind of effect on me was Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It is as is the case with most of Follett's novels, they are extremely well researched, very, very, very well researched. But unlike Dan Brown's novels, they are this thick. So you should have a lot of patience in order to read Ken Follett. You should read Pillars of the Earth, and you will understand European feudalism and the transition to capitalism. You will understand it quite reasonably if you read Ken Follett. Ken Follett is one of those people who researches very, very well. Another writer, that you should read is Norman Mailer. N-O-R-M-A-N, Norman, M-A-I-L-E-R, Mailer, Norman Mailer. You should read this book called Ancient Evenings, which is set up in a situation in ancient Greece. But the attention to detail, to research, the research behind that is something that you just cannot find any fault with. You just cannot find any fault with it. You should read that book, Norman Mailer's Ancient Evenings. And you should also read Irvin Shaw, not Irving Wallace, but Irwin, 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 Shaw. Shaw. His books on Michelangelo is called Agony and Ecstasy. And he wrote a book on Leonardo da Vinci as well, which is not a work of fiction. It is some kind of um, biographic novel. It's like a biographic novel. Both these works, if you can lay your hands on them, I suggest you please read these. Your life will be very, very enriched. Your life will be very enriched. So to come back to the point that I've been making anyway, that was a rather large detour. So words like Nazism, fascism, they've all become, they've been emptied of their original content, and they have taken on another form and other, I don't know if there is any content to them except that they are inhuman. And I was talking about Stalin, and I was telling you that the USA was searching for ways of combating the USSR, uh, because even though they fought as allies on the same side, their problem was that Lenin and the Bolshevik Party, which later became the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, they were targeting capitalism, so they didn't know initially how to combat the menace of communism. And for them, it was literally a menace because communism, right up to 1960s, held a fascination for Europeans who were tired of capitalism. They were absolutely tired of capitalism, and therefore you will find that uh, there is a movement among the youth, and in all that, it's rock music came up as a rebellion against society. And what was America's strategy to deal with it? The American strategy to deal with this rebellion that was expressing itself in various forms, not just in one form, not just as music. It was there in art, it was there everywhere, was to give LSD, which is popularly called acid. It was done at the instance of Timothy Leary, uh, who was the head of the CIA. Timothy Leary called LSD, I forget it's lysergic something. Seriously, I apologize for not being able to remember. I don't know what's happening to my memory. Uh, very serious apologies for not being able to tell you what LSD is, except that it's called acid, and if taken in large doses, it's a hallucinogen. But Timothy Leary sold that as a, what should I say? He sold it as a consciousness expanding substance. Okay, and this was given, it was legal to, to sell acid till about 1966, 67, I think. Till about that time, it was legal to sell acid. And the whole idea was let people trip on uh, let people trip on LSD and forget revolution and rebellion. That was the whole idea behind Timothy Leary doing this. But, and there have been many casualties. Lysergic acid diethylamide. Thanks, Akshay. So LSD, just let me type it out here for what happened to the rest. Yeah, that is LSD. Thank you. Thank you, Akshay. As usual, you have again saved my bacon, so to speak. So this was called a consciousness uh, expanding substance, but in reality, it was a hallucinogen that literally fried the brains of people who used it, and therefore they had to ban the substance ultimately. But it was legal till the late 60s. And in the meanwhile, Stalin gave a great weapon to the United States of America because of his anti-Leon Trotsky policies and chasing Trotsky down into Argentina and getting him assassinated there because he dared to oppose Joseph Stalin. It came to be communism, which people saw as hope of the future. Uh, they started the US started a campaign that it was dictatorship that took the rights away from people, and they equated it to fascism and Nazism. And that is a meaning that stuck for good. That is a meaning that stuck for good. And when I have tried to teach Marx and say Marx calls real democracy communist democracy, people say, how can you say communism is democracy? Isn't it the opposite of democracy? How can you say that it is communist democracy? So that's how well the propaganda machinery of the USA worked. And Nikita Khrushchev, who succeeded Stalin, understood what had happened, how terribly wrong this whole thing that uh, Stalin had done, how terribly wrong it had gone. And so he openly talked about de-Stalinization of the Soviet Union. And that was his way of trying to combat the the perceptions that were being created by the Americans worldwide that communism is no different from fascism and from um, Nazism. So communism also was emptied of its content. It also became yet another thing. So like it was with Naxalites. If somebody was a Naxalite, then man, this fellow is going to kill us. He's violent. He uses guns and he kills people. You know, so those kind of meanings get associated with things. So please remember that this is a very long story to tell you that prior to individualism, there was no such thing as socialism. There was no such thing as communism. All that existed was the prioritizing of society over the individual. As I have told you, in the army, you can have a soldier only if you have an army. You can have a teacher only if you have a school. You can have a student only if you have a school. So the collective comes first and the individual comes next. But in the modern period, you have the turning of this particular principle upside down. You turn this principle upside down. You say the individual comes first. You say the individual comes first. And this should not be understood as an arbitrary development. It's not an arbitrary development. You should consider this Right. So one should consider, why did individualism come up? It's a question worth considering. Why did it come up in the modern period? And individualism didn't come up in other parts of the world. For example, if you take Japan, let me just give you one particular fact here. Capitalism is primarily a European phenomenon. It is primarily a European phenomenon, and it has become a global phenomenon thanks to what is called colonialism. Because everywhere the Europeans went and set up colonies, they globalized that particular colonies and set up their capitalism there. So capitalism, individualism came from above in the colonies. Whereas in the case of Europe, both capitalism and individualism organically developed from under. They organically developed, they organically developed from within their own society. What we got as capitalism was brought to us by the British. The only country that had its own form of capitalism was Japan. It happened during It happened during the Tokugawa shogunry, meaning the Tokugawa shoguns were ruling Japan at that particular time. And they did exactly this thing that I have put here. They taxed peasants and farmers and landless workers. They taxed them irrespective of how much productivity happened in a particular year. The Tokugawa shoguns, Tokugawa is the equivalent of a dynasty. The rulers were called the shoguns, and their warriors are the samurai. Okay, so during the rule of the Tokugawa shoguns, uh, there was some kind of despotism in terms of taxes, and that led to the collapse of Japan and its feudal system. But they didn't have these other things, the professional guilds and the church as forms of control. They had Buddhism. And Buddhism, if you know the teachings of Buddhism, those three things, Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami, Sangam Sharanam Gacchami, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami, Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangha, Buddha emphasized on Sangha. He emphasized on Sangha. He recast the Sanskrit notion of dhyana. He recast it not as introspection into the individual self, which was what you find in Sanatana Dharma. He slightly recast it to look at the individual as a part of, hey, shut up, they're going, nobody's coming, idiot. Stop it. So the Sangha was society, and it also meant communes of people staying together. So if you've seen all those kung fu movies, not kung fu, kung fu movies like 36th Chamber of Shaolin, wherever there is a mention of the Shaolin temple, you find that this is where the monks lived. Okay, but that is actually a slightly inaccurate depiction of a Buddhist Sangha, because though women did not enjoy the same status, in a Sangha there were women as well. They did not enjoy the same status as men, but there were women as well. You hardly get to see women in the portrayal of the Shaolin temple and all in the Chinese films made under the banner of Golden Harvest. So the Buddhists were used to living in communities or communes, if you want to call them. So that is how it was in Japan, and they had this Zen principle, which is nothing but the Sanskrit word dhyana, which I told you when it went to China, it became Chan, and when it went to Japan, it became Zen. And Zen was not just meditating and introspection into one's own self, but it was also a meditation into how to make life better for the Sangha. Okay, that is one of the elements that was added to the traditional notion of dhyana by the Buddha. Okay, he did not believe that, when you become a sannyasin, then you have to live alone. He didn't believe in that. He still believed that you have to live in a sangha or a commune, and therefore you don't see individualism coming out of Japanese capitalism. Japanese capitalism substantially is different from European capitalism, and hence I have talked about this before. Japanese colonialism is also quite different from European colonialism. There is a spiritual dimension to capitalism and colonialism of the Japanese variety, which is completely absent, in Europe. Okay? Because people were sick of the controls of the church. They were sick of the feudal professional guilds that were not allowing people to move from one profession to another. And they were sick of the taxation. But that was not so much of a factor as the Christian church was, and to a much lesser extent, the feudal professional guild. It is a combination of these two, in that 90% is the Christian church and probably 10% is the feudal professional guild's contribution uh, uh, for the emergence of individualism in Europe. And another thing that we need to talk about here, while we are talking about individualism, is the Protestant ethic. So this also contributed to the emergence of individualism. When you say, look, as an individual, you can pray to God yourself. Okay? You don't need anybody to validate your prayers. You don't need somebody to tell you what God wants. You can know it for yourself. If these kind of things are said, then obviously it also contributes to individualism. It also contributes to individualism. And there is another development of the Protestant ethic. Okay, the problem with the Protestant ethic is this. Martin Luther said, here's the Bible. It was translated into vernacular, and thanks to Gutenberg, there was printing of the Bible in many vernacular languages. And when people read the Bible and then they prayed to God, they didn't hear God talking back to them. Till then, there was a certain kind of innocence in people because the church was doing two things. One is that it said the priest will pray to God on your behalf. The priest is seen as a servant and man of God, and he'll pray to God on your behalf and secure God's pardons for your deeds. And if you did something good, the church rewarded you with announcements during sermons, and it basically said these people are valuable members of the community because they are contributing to the community. So there was some kind of recognition and validation of acts of munificence, beneficence. All these were recognized by the church. But once the Protestant ethic said, go ahead, pray to God yourself. Does God come and tell you, you can do this? Please do it this way. God doesn't. God doesn't talk to you. So quite a substantial chunk of the Protestants started becoming some kind of atheists. Not exactly saying that there is no God, but they believe that prayers don't serve a purpose. And if we have to be recognized in society, then we have to do something. We have to do something unusual. And what was that? Amass wealth. So capitalism became complete materialism, not as matter coming before ideas. Materialism as in the pursuit of wealth or materialistic pursuits. So that's what capitalism became. And more and more people took to capitalism because they wanted to be recognized as achievers. Who doesn't want to be recognized as achievers? Why are people queuing up to become vice chancellors, heads of department, various things people are trying to become? So why all that? So you must remember that capitalism emerged from all these things along with individualism. And that is the beginning of the modern period. That is the true beginning of the modern period. When I meet you tomorrow, we'll get into the idea of the social contract and Hobbes. And this evening, as per the advice of the wise man of the class, we'll do Jeremy Waldron's critique of what should I say, communitarianism and multiculturalism, and what he offers as a solution, which is cosmopolitanism plus plus a little bit of community in it. But he's a great supporter of cosmopolitanism. So I am a big admirer of Waldron for that, because he looks for integration of humanity. He's also against national boundaries. He's against national boundaries. You'll see that in the evening. Thank you very much. Yasmin must be fuming at you're not going there. Apologies. Thank you, and see you in the evening. Thank you very
Yes, sir.
much.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
You, sir. Goodbye.